Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to Myth Monday here on Where All the Ladies At. This is a podcast where I, Kim, your favorite history nerd, dives deep into history, myth, and legend to try to figure out where all the women went, because it seems, I don't know about to you, but it seems to me like when people were writing those history books, they seem to have forgotten a few names. Just a few, just a couple. I mean, we are half of the population after all, so I think we had something to do with it. This month is Women's History Month, and so even though every month here on Where All the Ladies At is History Month, I am celebrating it hardcore with some amazing topics. So myths. On Monday's episodes, we do myths, and this month we are focusing on sun goddesses, which is something that is not typical. Typically, as I said in the last one, sun is related with the god and the moon is related with the goddess, but there are some places where things are flipped. And that's what we're covering. And then on Thursday's episodes, I'm covering women philosophers and women that stood up to fascism, because I think it's an apropos topic right now with the way the world is. Anyways, let's get into today. So today, I am going to try to pronounce this properly. I think it's Amaterasu. Is who we're covering, and she is in Japanese mythology, Shinto mythology to be exact, and she is the sun goddess. She is the reason why the sun rises every day, and deeply tied to a lot of the cultural and a spiritual identity of Japan. So let's do it. So, I sometimes like to do this where I jump in and I look at the culture and mythology and how women are entangled into that, right? So we're first going to take a look at, let me move my notes because of course I want to make sure I'm saying everything right. Let's first look at Japanese culture and mythology. So in mythology, Amaterasu, yes, is a pretty big deal. She's not the only goddess that really plays a big role. It's a very interesting dichotomy when we start talking about the culture, about women's role in like society versus women's role in mythology. It's this lovely duality that seems to happen in some of these cultures that still kind of half prescribe to the old way of thinking. So, there is actually a whole bunch of really powerful female deities in the mythology, right? Benzaiten, I think that's Benzaiten. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, guys. She's the goddess of medicine art. She's helps people find their rhythm and find their inspiration. There's also Izanami, which is the goddess of creation and death. And she's a pretty big figure as well. And then, these women aren't sidekicks. Here's the thing, and I'm going to say something I think some people might get a little offended, but when you look at the mythology of like Greece and all of that, sometimes the goddesses tend to be play second fiddle. That's what I'm going to say. They tend to play second fiddle, right? Hera is only around, really. There are some that are solely mythologies based with Hera in them. But 9 times out of 10, if Zeus is, screwing around, that's when Hera comes in. And there's always these things where it seems like the goddesses are kind of an afterthought, right? And not all stories, but just in general. But sometimes in some other religions, and it does seem to be more of like the Eastern religions, the other religions, women are integral in a lot of the stories. So That's just how I say it. That's my opinion. It's just how I feel. And all of these goddesses in the Japanese mythology are super important to keeping the world balanced. And if you know anything about Eastern philosophy, balance is key. It is in the Western philosophy as well, but just in a different way. It's I don't know. This is, once again, guys, I just want to be real honest. This is my opinions, and we can have dialogue. I would love to chat with you. By the way, speaking of which, I didn't do my typical spiel. I would love to chat with you, and if you want to, there's ways to do that in the description box. There's also ways to support the podcast. There's also ways to check out the Medium publication that goes with this, as well as my other podcast called Our Mystic Road Trip. So if you're into that, check that out. And now back to our regular scheduled programming. So anyways, but Amaterasu is like the pivotal goddess. All these other goddesses play a big role, but you know, she's the sun goddess. So without sun, a lot of bad things happen, right? So let's look at, this is where the dichotomy comes in, because when you look at Japanese myth, women are super vital in a lot of the stories, right? And I'm not saying that in the culture they're not, but it's a different thing, right? So if you look at the bigger picture in terms of women's roles in Japan, it's kind of complex, right? Pretty much in Japan's feudal history, women were, much like in most of the world, kind of confined to home and private spaces. They were expected to be wives and mothers and caretakers like normal, especially during the samurai and Edo periods. But I think we're going to talk about something really cool in the next couple months. There were some ladies that turned that on the head. We'll chat about that then. But when it came to like public roles, it was not really a thing for most of them back then, right? The feudal system really didn't give women a lot of power in the way we might expect today. But despite these limitations, figures like Amaterasu kind of show us that women were still seen as incredibly powerful and essential in other areas, especially when it came to spiritual and divine realms. Right? Shintoism, which is Japan's native religion, teaches that both male and female forces are equally important in the balance of life. This is the masculine and the feminine, the yin and the yang, right? All these ideas. And that is probably why in the mythology, in the religious, in the spiritual aspects of their culture, women play such a pivotal role, because it is key to have that balance. You have to have male, you have to have female energies in order to keep everything balanced, right? So with that being said, let's now that we have a little idea, you know, I think before we go, I think what's key here is to really see that even though women's public life roles in public life wasn't really big, it wasn't pronounced, in the spiritual world, women are recognized as central to the flow of existence, right? They're what sorry guys, I got a itchy in the throaty. Yeah, wet that whistle. They weren't a side story. They were like main forces in these myths, and they really kind of helped hold the entire world together. So, you know, in the world of Japanese mythology, women weren't passive. They were active agents. So let's get into it. Let's start talking about Amaterasu. Let me move my notes. All right. So as we all know, guys, I will be taking... Sorry, my cat decided she needed some love. Oh, I love you too. I will be looking at my notes. I'm too old to try to remember all this stuff. I love learning it, and I retain a lot of it, but I want to make sure I give you guys all the good stuff, right? So, we're going to break down Amaterasu, right? So, her full name is Amaterasu Omakami, but most people just kind of just say Amaterasu. She is the goddess of the sun. In Japan, Amaterasu role is extra. She's not only the source of the sunlight, but she's also the chief deity in Shinto. That's Japanese indigenous religion, as I said. And when I'm saying chief, I mean like she's like she's like at the head of the table. She doesn't sit back. She doesn't delegate tasks. Amaterasu is making that sunrise every day, and helping provide warmth and light for so that the world can keep spinning. She's the reason you have sunny days. You know, and if you're like me, it's probably also the reason we end up with a little bit of summer glow. You know, tans. Why not? I sunburn. I'm not gonna lie. I love Amaterasu, but sometimes I wish it would turn it a little. She'd turn it a little down, if you know what I mean. But she's not only about sunshine, right? So if you think about sun, sun is the pivotal force, right, of everything. It has connections to growth, and that means crops and trees and flowers. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't have those things, right? She's literally the source of life on earth, right? She embodies light in every sense, spiritual light, and that means she's the goddess of hope and clarity and all of that stuff. Physical light, so warmth and life. She is basically all about growth, right? From crops to wisdom, basically. Fertility, growth, all of these things. She is like super vital to everything. But her influence isn't just stuck in ancient times, right? She is tied also to the imperial family of Japan. There are some that believe that Amaterasu is the direct ancestor of the Japanese emperors, right? In other words, Japan's imperial line traces its roots back to her. That means she's like a royal grandma to Japan, right? She, so that gives her like a tangible tie to the Japanese people, right? She's not one of those goddesses or gods that are just floating around and has no relevance in the real world. She is like linked to this powerful entity. I mean, and maybe it's not as powerful as it used to be, but it's still there and still respected. And I do appreciate that. So we talked about what she is the goddess of. We talked about everything, right? So crops, sunlight, everything. Balance is where she really shines. So Amaterasu is the like cosmic caretaker, if you would, keeping everything in order. If she were in the modern world, she'd probably be like an organizer and someone who was very earthy and all that stuff, right? Amaterasu is about and balanced and maybe like a very like Zen-like person, she just is. She is the source of everything. She, once again, I'll repeat, without sunlight, we wouldn't be anywhere, right? So let's talk. This is, sorry. This is one of my favorite things to do, and that is the archaeological evidence. So we're going to take back and look at the historical side of things, right? She wasn't just a mythical figure for ancient. She was a real powerful symbol that really showed up in the country's spiritual and political life. Thousands of years before anyone even thought of creating, the internet or anything, her evidence of her is pretty clear. There is the Grand Shrine of Ise, I think it's how you say it, and that is located in the Mie Prefecture. By the way, guys, if I'm mispronouncing this, I apologize. I'm trying really hard. And if you want to correct me, that's perfectly okay. Just do it nicely, please, because I am trying with a lot of respect. So, the Mie Mie Prefecture, maybe, has been dedicated to Amaterasu for over 1,000 years. It's not really just a shrine. It's kind of one of those sacred spaces in Japan that's very important. In fact, it's rebuilt every 20 years. So why would they tear it down and then rebuild it every couple of decades? Well, it's not about tearing down history, first of all. It's about keeping things in a constant state of renewal. And the idea is it's just kind of like the sun, right? It rises and refreshes in the world each day. The shrine needs to be kind of continuously renewed to honor Amaterasu's power. So other than that, archaeological digs have, in and around this region in particular, and other sites related to Shinto rituals, have really kind of shown that Amaterasu was woven into Japan's spiritual fabric, right? She wasn't just seen as the goddess up in the heavens. She had real physical ties to the earth and the people. It seems that through these archaeological digs, they've really found that she had an integral part in the cosmos, as well as I said, in the imperial rule. She is the divine ancestor of the Japanese imperial family to them, and that meant that her philosophy and her thoughts and her being played a part in the political movements of Japan. So she wasn't just an ancient myth. She was like the cornerstone of the imperial rule and the emperor's right to divine rule. It basically, the emperor was a gift from the sun goddess herself, right? When looking at her role in Japanese myth, obviously, besides the sun goddess, she was considered in charge of life and order and harmony, as I said, balance of nature, cycle, really controlling the cycles that rule the world, from the seasons to everything, right? If Amaterasu had disappeared, right, the world would have been thrown into chaos, right? In fact, there's a myth that says without her light, there would be no seasons, no crops, no life as we know it. So, yeah, she's super essential to the growth of the world, right? And the thing is that stories of her is not just like bedtime stories. Some myths, that's what they are. They're meant to be there. But the tales of her and her being are very important to Shintoism. And she's not only the goddess of the sun, like I said. So, it became kind of she is the perfect epitome of fresh starts, always. And there's a whole myth, and we'll go into that in a minute, the stories. But I want to talk about symbolism and worship. So, she's a sun goddess, right? So, obviously, she's going to be represented by solar discs, and even I think, I don't know about this, but like the Japanese flag probably has a little bit of symbolism to it as well. Light, of course. White colors, all of that stuff, anything like that, that's going to be a symbol of her. The thing with her, when we come to worshiping her, it wasn't just kind of about visiting shrines, right? Her presence, because of her integral part in everything, was tied to everyday life, right? And people worshipped her through a lot of different ways, including agriculture, right? So when they were in the fields, they would do things for her. People would pray for good harvest, of course. Of course, visiting the shrines is important. They'd pray in the fields, though. Her blessings weren't just controlled to the shrines and the temples, right? because she was tied to so much everyday life actions, she is one of the gods and goddesses of this mythology that kind of touched everybody, right? She had a few symbols, right, tied to her. There's a mirror, and this played a key role in her myth. And then, so mirrors, are about truth and self-reflection and inner clarity. So that kind of makes a lot of sense when it comes as a symbol, right? Another symbol was the sakaki tree, and the sakaki is a sacred tree. Let me make sure. And it's often used in Shinto rituals, and it's tied very closely to Amaterasu. Its leaves were used to make offerings and decorations for rituals, and obviously it was used as an offering of purity and reverence. Let's talk a little bit about the Ise Shrine. It's basically the center. We mentioned it earlier in the podcast. It's been dedicated to her for, like I said, a long, long time, and lots of people travel from all over to visit Ise. And of course, they still bring prayers to the goddess. They ask for prosperity and health and all that kind of stuff. The shrine is particularly important because it really represents the very essence of Amaterasu, right? It's kind of where the people can really connect to her divine presence. And as I said, it's rebuilt every 20 years to keep everything fresh. It is basically a living tribute to her and her influence, which I think is very kind of cool because I think, hold on, sorry guys. I think it's kind of really beautiful that even to this day, there's still such a focus on ensuring that they follow those traditions, right? Every 20 years, the shrine gets rebuilt, torn down, rebuilt. That's dedication. That's reverence. I really appreciate, and this is kind of something that, and that once again, I want to repeat, I'm always going to tell you guys, this is my opinion. I think it's something that we lack in the Western parts of the world, is this reverence and respect for tradition. The Eastern cultures, and I would say even like the African cultures, really have this respect for tradition. Not so much so that they don't jump into the modern world, but a respect and reverence that allows them to hold tight to it, but also like move with the flow, right? I don't know. It's hard for me to explain. I just really respect it, right? I really, really respect it. Today, Amaterasu is still worshipped. She's very her power. That's the word that came to mind, and her influence is still very much alive in Japan. People still visit her shrines. There's festivals and rituals that are held in her honor, and important symbols like the mirror and sakaki. They all remain pretty prevalent in those Shinto practices. Her worship, of course, has evolved over the years, but basically the essence of it is still the same. So it's just really awe-inspiring that this is stuck through here. So now here's the thing, guys. I have a couple different stories for her because a lot of the myths that come from this area, and this is just what I've seen. I could be wrong. I'm not a scholar in this situation. I just Google and read. That's it. I fact checked, but I Google and read, so I'm not a scholar. A lot of the Japanese myths sometimes can be kind of short, and there's multiple within it. So I have a couple different ones. So we've got one, two, I've got two. Let me make sure I want to read. You know what? I'm only going to read one of them, I think. Right? I think they're both tied to each other, though. So we'll see how it goes. All right, guys. So, per the usual, it's story time. Grab your beverage of choice, whether that be hot cocoa or a cocktail. I'll grab a blankie, curl up, and let's see how it goes. So, Picture this. A heated argument between two divine siblings, and it leads to an event so chaotic it plunges the world into an abyss of darkness. This is the story. So, here's how it goes. Amaterasu's brother, Susanoo, the god of storms, was not exactly known for his calm demeanor. He was a guy who would kind of throw some tantrums and leave destruction in his wake because he did. He was wild and untamed and sometimes downright reckless. And in this particular tale, his wild ways hit a breaking point. He wreaks havoc on the heavens and insults his sister and pretty much pushes her to the brink. And she is the sun goddess, but she got a little tired of dealing with this tantrum. So, here we go. Let me move this down. In an act of exasperation, Amaterasu decides she's had enough. She retreats to a cave, she seals herself away from the world, and here's where things get intense. When the god of the sun goes into hiding, what happens? The world is plunged into an eternal night. No sunlight, no warmth, no harvest. Imagine that world without a sun. Everything would turn cold and dark, and nothing would grow. It's basically a very bad cosmic blackout. The other gods, desperate to bring her back, start panicking, right? They know that without her, the very fabric of life is unraveling. Crops are wilting, animals grow weak, and the world itself seems to lose all its vibrancy. So the gods come together with one goal. Let's get Amaterasu out of that cave, right? So, what do you do when the goddess of the sun won't come out? You throw a party. That's what you do, right? Because who can turn down a party? The gods gather outside the cave. They're chanting, they're singing, they're putting on a spectacle that pretty much could rival any of the big royal festivals. They try everything to coax her out of her self-imposed exile, but nothing seems to be working. Amaterasu kind of remains hidden. She refuses to merge. The gods are really kind of like, what are we going to do? And it's kind of feeling like all hope is lost. That is, until the goddess Uzumi, the goddess of entertainment and revelry, steps up. She says, she's not the type to just sit back, right, and watch. So she has a plan. She begins dancing. A dance that is so wild, so full of life, that it sends waves of laughter echoing through the heavens, right? Her movements are kind of infectious, so she starts basically a dance trend. So all the other gods start doing the same thing, right? And everybody's bursting into laughter. It's really that kind of laughter that it's like, wait, what's going on out there, right? It shakes the sky, it lifts the spirits, everyone who hears it. And so, Amaterasu's sitting in the cave and she's, maybe she's journaling. Who knows what she was doing in there, just chilling, meditating. But she starts hearing this ruckus outside. She's like, what is going on out there, man? They are having a great time without me. So she's like, okay, I'm going to peek out. I need to see what's going on. What is all this noise, right? So, and then she looks out, she sees the gods laughing and dancing. And then something inside her's like, you know what? What is happening here? And then as she's scanning the thing, she sees something that's even more kind of enticing. She sees a mirror. The gods had placed a sacred mirror outside the cave as part of their plan, right? And of course, Amaterasu's reflection catches her eye, and she's kind of like, "Whoa, who is that?" Right? And so she steps out of the cave because she wants to get a better look. She's like, "Let me check everything. Am I looking good still? It's been dark in there, And just as she does that, the light returns to the world. The sun is back in the sky, and with it warmth and life and hope. And crops begin to grow again, animals return to the lively ways, and the world is bathed in sunlight. It's basically like the entire world just takes a deep breath and it's like, oh, finally. It's kind of like when winter's just ending and it's that first day where it's really the perfect weather and you step out in sunlight. It was kind of like that. So the moral of the story basically is sometimes all it takes to lift the darkness is a little laughter and a good dance, right? So In a world full of chaos and conflict, it's very easy to forget the power of joy and curiosity, right? Amaterasu's return to the world kind of shows that even in the darkest moments, you can find light, whether it's the stupid dance that you do, it's a TikTok dance, or, or just the way, self-reflection, right? Whatever it is, there's always a way to bring the light back into our lives. And it's not just a lighthearted tale, right? It really talks about how much is vital role in maintaining the balance of the world. Without her, there was no life, no order, no harmony. The world is dark. But when she reappears, suddenly everything falls back into place, right? So I think it's a pretty beautiful myth. I don't want to offend anybody, but Amaterasu was a little narcissistic, right? There was a little touch of narcissus in there somewhere, right? Because the thing that brought her out was not her friends having fun and people laughing and enjoying. It was like, oh, that mirror. Look at that. Who's that? Let me check my profile. Is everything good? But she still came out of the cave and everything returned. And so that's pretty beautiful. And that's Amaterasu, guys. The Shinto Japanese mythology sun goddess. Pretty cool. There's so much more that we could talk about, as there always is. But, I try to keep these between 30 and 40 minutes because, I know you guys got busy lives. So, that's it for this week. Come back next week. We're going to talk about another sun goddess. Some really cool things are going to happen. And make sure you check out Thursday's episode because this week we are covering Hannah Arendt, super cool philosopher. And make sure you go back and check out my podcast on Simone de Beauvoir, who is also yet another amazing female philosopher who has some very interesting ideas on gender, which I think kind of plays a big role right now, seeing how gender seems to be a very controversial word. Who knew? So check it out. Make sure you check out Hannah Arendt. Make sure you stick with us. There is more than one person in here. For the rest of the month, we're covering some more amazing, like I said, sun goddesses, and also 2 more women after this week that stood up to fascism in some pretty amazing ways. All of which I think are super important, and they're definitely ladies that need to be known and heard and talked about. So that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you want to reach out to me, tell me that I mispronounce things horribly, and that's fine. You can do so through the links in my social media, and of course you can always leave me a comment here on this video, or if you're watching on YouTube. Also, if you want more information, you can check out the Medium publication that comes with this. There's more about the topics that I talk about, as well as a bunch of other stuff. You can also, if you want to support the podcast, you can do that in several different ways. If you want to spit a little cash my way, there are links to my Buy Me Coffee and Patreon in the show notes, and there is also you can just like, review, share, comment, follow, do everything you can to get the word out about the podcast, because the more people that listen, the more people that watch, the more we have a huge community that can talk about these amazing women, and perhaps maybe eventually someday I'll be able to have guests on and we can talk about these badass ladies together, right? And that is it for this episode, guys. I hope you guys have a wonderful time, and catch you next week with some more fascinating myths. And always, guys, stay curious, stay blessed, stay safe.